Sometimes data can tell a story you would never expect. It can reveal these hidden patterns in the choices we make over a lifetime. So, okay, let's dive into this because we're about to uncover a really fascinating and frankly a pretty surprising story that's been hiding inside the health data of long-term smokers. It all kicks off with a mystery. Get this. What if I told you that one of the biggest health risks for a 70-year-old smoker wasn't just the stuff we always hear about like lung cancer or heart disease, but something you'd expect to find in a kindergarten classroom? Yeah, this is the central question that's going to kick off our whole investigation. And look, this isn't just some wild theory. Take a look at this slide. This is raw data from a major health study. And right there, clear as day, for a 70-year-old female smoker, the second highest correlated condition is hand, foot, and mouth disease. At first glance, it makes absolutely no sense, right? Well, to figure this out, we have to rewind. We have to go back in time and trace the very, very different paths that men and women walk through a lifetime of smoking. Okay, so our story really begins in the 50s. This is such a crucial decade because it's where the data shows the health journeys of male and female smokers just start to split and head in these dramatically different directions. For men, the danger is right there. It's immediate and it's severe. The data is practically screaming a warning at us. The two biggest risks: myocardial infarction, that's the heart attack, and angina. The source material even tells the story about a 50-year-old guy, a tennis player, who gets short of breath during a match. And that's not just him being tired. That's a sign his heart is literally screaming for help. So the big takeaway here is that for a male smoker in his 50s, the body isn't sending these subtle little hints. Nope, it's a ticking time bomb of potential cardiovascular collapse. The threat is acute, and it is absolutely life-threatening. But then you look at the women, and it's a completely different story. The warnings are way more subtle, kind of like gathering clouds instead of an immediate storm. A top risk here is skin precancer, and this starts to show up as that protective shield of estrogen begins to fade after menopause, which makes the skin just way more vulnerable to all the damage from smoking. This slide just lays it out perfectly. You can see the split right here. On the left, you've got the man's data. It's like an emergency siren for the heart. And on the right, the woman's data. It's a slower, more systemic warning that the body's defenses are starting to break down. Two very different stories are starting to play out. All right, let's move on to the 60s and see how this all builds. This next decade is really the breaking point. It's where the consequences of those two different paths become, well, devastatingly clear. So for men, that time bomb that was ticking away in their 50s, it explodes in their 60s. The data shows a full-blown crisis. Myocardial infarction is right there near the top, and it's followed by this devastating wave of cancers. Stomach cancer, leukemia, lung cancer, the list just goes on. The damage has just piled up and reached a critical mass. But again, for women in their 60s, the data tells another story. The storm is still gathering. Now, we see some incredibly dangerous precursors, things like thoracic aortic aneurysms. That's a weakening of the body's main artery. And we still see a risk of skin precancers. It is serious, for sure. But that full-blown crisis we just saw in men, it seems to be lagging about 10 years behind. And this right here reveals an absolutely stunning pattern, a 10-year delay. The health crisis that just hits men with full force in their 60s, heart attacks, a cascade of cancers. It doesn't seem to show up for women until they hit their 70s, with things like pancreatic cancer and aortic aneurysm. So this brings us to the 70s and 80s, and the data here is telling a totally new kind of story. This is the story of the people who survived that brutal filter of the earlier decades. And to really get it, we need to understand a key concept. It's called survivorship bias. All it means is that the data we're looking at now is only from the folks who made it this far. The men who had those awful heart attacks in their 60s, well, they aren't in the data set anymore. So the risks we see now aren't just the risks of getting old. They're the risks of surviving to old age as a smoker. So what does that survivor's journey actually look like? Well, for the men who make it to their 80s, the data shows this chronic, grinding battle with respiratory failure, things like tuberculosis and metabolic diseases. For women, that delayed storm finally hits them in their 70s, and that's followed by signs of increasing frailty in their 80s. But why? Why are their journeys so fundamentally different? The answer seems to lie in this concept called hormonal homeostasis. It's just the way the body keeps its internal environment stable. And the source material has this fascinating theory that men and women use fundamentally different strategies to keep that balance. Think about it like this. The male system is like a rigid wall. It's strong, right? It resists change. It holds firm against all this stress until a pressure point just becomes too great and the whole thing catastrophically breaks. Boom, a sudden heart attack. The female system, though, is more like a flexible net. It bends, it adapts, it absorbs stress over and over. But after a lifetime of exposure to toxins like smoking, that flexible net can become hopelessly tangled, and that leads to these widespread systemic problems with immunity and metabolism. And that fundamental difference brings us full circle, right back to the mystery we started with. It is time to finally solve the case of the children's disease. After everything we've just learned about these two completely different life paths, what on earth does hand, foot, and mouth disease have to do with any of it? Well, first, we realize it wasn't a one-off thing, not an anomaly. As we look across all the data, this children's disease just keeps popping up. It appears for women in their 50s, their 60s, and their 70s, and it even shows up for men in their 70s. This isn't a fluke, it's a definite pattern. And here is the twist. The explanation? It's not biological. It has nothing to do with hormones or blood vessels. The answer is social. The answer is in the home. This single data point is a social indicator. It's like a ghost in the machine that's telling a deeply, deeply human story. What it suggests is that these elderly smokers, whose immune systems have just been battered by a lifetime of smoking, are providing what the source calls twilight childcare. They're taking care of their grandchildren. They're getting infected with common childhood viruses because they're in close, loving contact with the kids in their family. Wow. So let's just quickly recap this incredible journey we've uncovered. For men, the path is one of acute crisis in their 50s and 60s, a storm of heart disease and cancer. And that's followed by a chronic respiratory decline for the ones who survive. For women, it's a slower, more systemic decline, with warnings in their 50s, these dangerous precursors in their 60s, and then the arrival of that delayed storm in their 70s. At the end of the day, this data tells this powerful hidden story of two different journeys, shaped by biology, by choices, and even by family love. It really makes you wonder, if this data is the story of choices made in the past, what story will the data of the future tell about us?